Support for OutFront comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Home plays a big role in your life. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully, so you can be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/outfront.
Out front next, Donald Trump playing defense tonight in the S-hole scandal. Is he in denial? Plus, did President Trump really say S-hole? His defenders are spinning a new theory tonight. Call it the S-house defense. And the incredible shrinking wall coming, maybe, to a border near you. Let's go out front. Good evening, everyone. John Berman here, in for Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, in denial. Call it the house of denial, not the hole of denial. The president with a new declaration that he is not a racist following that Oval Office meeting where he said he would rather have immigrants from Norway and Asia than blank hole countries in Africa. He also has a new attack on the one Democratic senator at that meeting. He wrote, Senator Dickie Durbin totally misrepresented what was said at the DACA meeting. Deals can't get made when there is no trust. Durbin blew DACA and is hurting our military. Senator Durbin said that the president referred to African nations as blank hole countries. But as the president arrived back at the White House just moments ago and says Senator Durbin totally misrepresented that meeting, and two Republican senators support the president on that, we're getting a new explanation for what they're basing that on. An explanation that might reveal their claims as a load of, well, blank. Here we go. A senior Republican source familiar with the matter tells CNN that some Republicans at that meeting say that they did not hear the president call them shithole countries. They heard the president call them shithouse countries. House, not hole. So that is where the denials come from. House, not hole. This was Senator Durbin's response.
I don't know that changing the word from hole to house changes the impact which this has. I stick with my original interpretation. I am stunned that this is their defense.
No denials that the president said he would rather have folks from Norway than the hole/house nations in Africa, which is why some folks are calling the president's word racist to begin with. But the president sees no problem on that front.
No, I'm not a racist. I am the least racist person you have ever interviewed.
I'm not a racist. That now lives in the annals of presidential denials along with Richard Nixon.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
And Bill Clinton, who said,
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
So for what it's worth, according to Congress, Nixon kind of was and Clinton kind of did. As for President Trump himself said today is honoring about the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King with, quote, acts of civic work and community service. But the president himself chose a different course today, a golf course, his 95th day at one of his golf resorts. Our Jeff Zeleny is out front at the White House now. Jeff, President Trump just arrived back there from his resort in Palm Beach. Does the White House really think that this house, not whole defense, which is sort of breathtaking in its audacity, do they think it's going to work?
John, it is breathtaking. And in fact, we tried to ask the president that very question as he was arriving here just a few moments ago. It is kind of an odd question to ask the president of the United States, but I guess you could say he started it here. But he did not answer any of our questions as he walked into the White House, really setting up what is going to be a fascinating 4 days to come here, John. We know in a substance-wise, the deadline for government funding, a potential government shutdown looming on Friday. We know this immigration, which looked like a bipartisan deal was coming together only a week ago, suddenly looks like anything but that. So what the White House is facing here, they believe this has obfuscated this a little bit. I mean, Republicans, a couple senators who were in that meeting said, look, the president did not say that. A member of his cabinet said, look, the president did not say that. But, John, I think setting all that aside, the substance of the matter tonight is this. Democrats and Republicans are a long ways away from reaching a deal on immigration. That immigration deal was supposed to keep the government open on Friday. They have a lot of heavy thinking, a lot of work to do between now and then. Never mind all this conversation, which likely will continue between S-hole and S-house. John.
All right, Jeff Zeleny for us at the White House. Out front tonight, Democratic Congresswoman Val Demings. She is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Representative, thank you so much for being with us. So we're getting this spin that the White House and these Republican senators who back the president's side are basing it on the fact that he said, and I'm going to say the words hopefully for one last time, shit house countries, not shit hole countries. Does that distinction matter to you?
Hi, John. First of all, let me say this. When the President of the United States has to repeatedly say, because of his words or his actions, that he's not a racist, we have a definite problem. I think the fact that we are talking about this during Martin Luther King's birthday is just a painful reminder that racism is still the ghost in the room, and it has found its way to the White House. It's almost insulting. It's definitely disturbing and disappointing that the other two Republican senators in the room would suggest that there is a difference between whole and house. And I just think that is ridiculous, and they really should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, look, if that's what they're basing their claims on, are they simply lying about the substance of the meeting?
I think they're trying to use a technicality as an excuse. For the people who come from Haiti or African nations or other immigrants who believe in the American dream and are trying their best to make America their home, whether you say whole or house, it is insulting, it is degrading, it is divisive, and the president owes them an apology. And if the other Republican senators in that room are going to use that as an excuse, a technicality that he did not disparage those nations, they owe them an apology as well.
So the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was on Fox News today, and she was defending what the president said. This is Alveda King.
People were saying that President Trump has called Haiti and Africa a bad word. Mm-hmm. Well, no, he was referring to the corruption in those countries that needs to be fixed, where they actually are hellholes over there because of the stranglehold of corruption.
What's your response to that?
You know, John, everybody is entitled to their opinion. I worked in law enforcement for 27 years. I have spent quite a bit of time providing security, for example, for white supremacist group who were demonstrating in Orlando. And it is clear to me, and having to, listen to the things that they have said during those demonstrations, it's pretty clear to me what the president meant. I did not hear him talk about corruption or the report from the senators who were in the room. They didn't put it in that context that he was talking about corruption or crime or the problems in the area, but he referred to those nations in that disparaging way.
So even before you were a member of Congress and even before this latest round of statements, you said that you believe that then Donald Trump, now President Trump, is a racist. So the question is, how do you then deal with such a person? What is your advice to your leaders in Congress right now who are trying to hammer out a deal on Dreamers, trying to hammer out a budget agreement? How do you want to see them approaching this man that you've called a racist?
Well, let me say this. As I indicated earlier, I worked at the police department for 27 years, served as the police chief. And let's put this in the context of if a police officer had used those remarks to refer to people from other nations, he or she would have been fired. And so they would have been fired because if there were a racist, or they had the appearance of being a racist. Perception is reality. Both are a problem. But with that being said, here we are in less than a week. We certainly do not want to shut the government down. We have 800,000 children out there who are dependent on us to come up with legislation that protects them. I believe they are a priority. I believe we have the obligation to continue to work for a deal to protect those 800,000 children who are dependent on us. I am hopeful that the president and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will come up with meaningful legislation that will protect the DACA kids.
You said don't want to shut the government down, but are you willing to shut the government down if the president doesn't sign on to some deal on Dreamers before we're talking about Saturday or Friday night at midnight?
Well, John, what I will tell you, I'm not going to telegraph what I will do here on your show, but what I will tell you is this. DACA is a priority. Those children are here through no fault of their own. They were promised that they could stay here through the previous administration, or rather previous administration. I believe that this president has an obligation to not punish them and drag them through the political games that are currently being played, unfortunately, out of this administration and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
One thing that I don't think should be lost in the back and forth here was the deal that was brought to the president that presumably, Dick Durbin, the Democratic senator from Illinois, had signed on to, and presumably some Democratic member of the House, included funding, some funding, limited funding, for something that could be construed as a border fence or a border wall. Is that something that you could vote for if it included protection for Dreamers? Could you vote yes on a bill that gave money to to President Trump's border wall?
As I said, I do believe that the Dreamers have to be a priority. Look, I also believe that our national, let me say this, our national security is critical. And I believe even the White House has said that he talked about the wall during the campaign, but he's also talked about fencing. He talked about technology. I have no issue with enhancing our border security. Our national security is important, but we will not do that at the expense of the Dreamers.
We're just learning, I think, that some of your colleagues are going to boycott the State of the Union address. Do you see yourself going to listen to the president later this month?
It's very possible because we have quite a few more days to go. And while I am currently planning on attending, I have invited someone who was involved in the Pulse nightclub shooting. They are certainly excited about being there and having that experience. But between now and the time of the State of the Union, who knows what the president might do or say. And so we have to play that one day by day.
All right. Representative Val Demings, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Out front next, did the president say S-hole or S-house? And does it really matter what term he used? Plus, Mitt Romney standing up to the president over this whole controversy. So where's the rest of the Republican Party? And Steve Bannon on deck. The president's former chief strategist prepares to testify in the Russia probe. And we just learned about one other key aide about to testify.
In need of great talent for your business, but short on time? You don't have to get lost in a huge stack of resumes to find your perfect hire. You just need the right tools, smarter tools. It can be challenging finding great talent to make your business successful. ZipRecruiter posts your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards with just one click. Then ZipRecruiter actively looks for the most qualified candidates and invite them to apply. No wonder 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes and industries to find the most qualified job candidates with immediate results. And right now, listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/outfront. That's ZipRecruiter.com/outfront. One more time, to try it for free, go to ZipRecruiter.com/outfront.
New tonight, Republican rift. Senator Lindsey Graham firing back as two other Republican senators in the room with the president say it is false to say that the president referred to African countries as, quote, S-hole countries. It's not an exact quote because I didn't swear that time. Senator Graham, who previously told Senator Tim Scott the reporter remarks were basically accurate, tells South Carolina's Post-Courier, quote, my memory hasn't evolved. I know what was said and I know what I said. Senator Graham today also lamented that the president of the United States is now using such explicit language.
The discourse right now is pretty low. We're producing some pretty good policy, but those of us in my business need to up their game. It's pretty embarrassing when you have to take your children out of the room just to report the news.
Out front now, national affairs correspondent for The Nation, Joan Walsh, and former Republican Congressman Jack Kingston. He was also a senior advisor to the Trump campaign. And, Joan, I have to say, the reporting tonight from a senior Republican source familiar with the meeting is that these Republican senators, Perdue and Cotton, are basing their denials of this discussion on the fact, and I'm going to say it this time because it's important, they say the president said shit house and not shit hole, and that changes everything. When I first heard that, I was like, that can't be. That can't be how they're justifying what they're saying.
It changes nothing. I mean, actually, on this program Thursday night, Rich Lowry said that same thing. He heard that. But even Rich Lowry, devout Republican, defender of President Trump, agreed. It doesn't change anything, but this is what they're saying. Now they're using it as a basis to basically impeach, deride Senator Dick Durbin, claim that this never happened. And the two words, I can't wait to bring Jack Kingston in here because I think he's going to agree with me this time. The two words mean the same thing. Right, Jack?
So Congressman, let's ask you first before we ask you anything else.
Sorry.
Would you agree that on substance, blank hole and blank house, there's very little difference?
I do agree with Joan. I don't see the difference. I will say this. I know David Perdue and Tom Cotton very well, and I know them to be guys who are fairly accurate. But I think, beyond the discussion is, in a private room, people say things. I've been in these private rooms with members of Congress, and people throw elbows rhetorically and say things. But generally speaking, you don't walk out and go and, like a songbird and say, well, he said something. Or if it was so offensive to you, you might get up and walk out right there on the spot. And I've seen that happen. But, apparently everybody in the meeting stayed in the meeting and then later decided that there was a political advantage in talking about this. But I think if you're sincerely worried about dreamers and the budget, that you would say, look, we got to get beyond this because this has now become the story.
Well, Senator Graham, if you're following the reports of the meeting, Senator Graham, Lindsey Graham, a Republican who has been friendly with the president of late, did stand up, we're told, to the president in that meeting and said his piece in that meeting. And Senator Durbin said he was very impressed by that. And Senator Graham today, if you saw him, was a little bit sort of, I don't know if he was shaken up by it, but it clearly affected him, what he heard. And he said he wished he hadn't heard that. So Senator Graham did take a stand there, Congressman.
But originally, if you remember, he said he made one statement, and then the next time he was asked about it, he said, I've said all I'm going to say. I think that he should have stayed there, and really that way you would be advancing the cause of DACA. We do know this, is that Tom Cotton and David Perdue voted for Donald Trump. Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin did not. So you can't take the politics out of this situation. But you can put the substance back in it, which is, let's talk about the border wall. Let's talk about chain migration. Let's talk about merit-based immigration. Let's talk about E-Verify, birthright citizenship. There's a lot of things to be discussed in a short period of time if they really want to get to a deal by Friday.
But, Jack, I honestly think the president took all of that substance right out of the conversation. When he used that word, he then made calls the entire evening, asking friends, what do you think? I think it went well. I think it was the right thing to say. I think the base is going to like it. The president had a problem. 2 days before that, he had talked about a bill of love. We're going to craft a bill of love for these DACA kids. And then he got a lot of pushback from his conservative anti-immigrant base. And so I believe he went in there, dropped that word, knew it would get out, was challenged by Lindsey Graham, and he's the one who now has made it very hard to talk about what is the substance of a bill that could get bipartisan support. And now we're back to, is this guy a racist? And what kind of bill does he want? Does he not want any brown immigrants in this country? There's a reason to be asking that question, and he's the reason.
But still, those questions that if you want to talk about merit or you want to talk about countries of origin as part of the immigration mix, for example, I think the visa lottery idea is obsolete at this point.
They all agreed. That part of that deal, they all agreed to get rid of the visa lottery.
And what I'd hate is, politically, any fig leaf will do. If you don't want to do something, any excuse is out there, and you can pin your hat on it, particularly if you want the issue rather than the solution. If you want the politics of it to continue into an election year, then you can say, well, because he said something that's offensive to my tender ears, and I, as a U.S. Senator, have never, ever heard such language, nor has such words ever come from my precious lips. If you want to say that, and then end of discussion. But I think the reality is, we pay all of them, Democrats and Republicans, to sit down and hammer out these differences that we're going to have in a country of 320 million people. And so, to me, they need to start really getting back in the room and saying, look, everything we say in here obviously is going to get outside, so let's all clean up our language, but let's try to figure out a deal. And one thing I do know, Joan, that is important, Republicans have told me, is most House members will support a bill that the president will sign. There's a lot more flexibility out there than you would think. So if they get back to that Tuesday bipartisan meeting attitude, I think they can come up with a solution.
Joan, is this just how sausage gets made, as the congressman was suggesting there?
I don't think so. I think this is a different brand of sausage altogether with this president. I just feel like, I heard what the congressman was saying, and I kind of felt like he was saying it about Democrats. They want this to continue as an issue. But really what happened was on Tuesday, on Wednesday, Thursday, before that meeting, there really were Democrats ready to compromise. Dick Durbin went in there with Lindsey Graham because he thought, the two of them thought they had a deal. They had a potential deal. And then, there were other people in the meeting that they didn't expect. It got tense. Now there's no deal. So, I think this president felt like he'd walked out too far, and he had to walk back, and he had to throw a gross word into the mix to do so.
Congressman, just so we're clear, are you comfortable with either description that the president used there, either the S-hole or the S-house?
No, because I do know it's going to have the ramifications that it has had.
But not just for the ramifications. I mean, can something be bad in and of itself and not just for its consequences?
No, John, I actually lived in Africa. I have 3 children that I sponsor for now 10 years in Rwanda. I've traveled there many times with Senator Jim Inhofe. It's offensive, and I understand the criticism of it. But John, I do want to say one thing. The people who are on these gangs in the Senate, the gang of 3, the gang of 6, or a gang of 8, or whatever, there's almost this we own the issue because we've been dealing with it a long time. And unfortunately, you got 218 votes that you have to have in the House and 60 in the Senate. And a lot of times I've seen these small groups kind of run off in a kind of a little inner circle, maybe even an elite, arrogant type fashion, saying our bill is the best bill, and if we don't get it, it's the one that's going to pass. And I think there is some of that rank and file pushback on this bill, that the nerve of these people thinking on an issue this big that the 6 of them are going to have their way.
Thank you very much, Congressman Jack Kingston. Joan Walsh, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Out front next, a Republican senator calls out his colleagues and urges them to stand up to the president. Will they? And 3 people close to the president set to testify in the Russia probe. Steve Bannon, Corey Lewandowski, Hope Hick. These were campaign all-stars and one a key White House insider. What might they reveal?
Support for Out Front comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. Rocket Mortgage is simple, allowing you to fully understand all the details and be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/outfront. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030.
New tonight, Republicans under fire and facing new pushback from voters over the president's blank hole comments last week. Republican member Kathy Morris Rogers was booed while speaking about civil rights.
To Edmund Pettus Bridge for the police. Oh my God.
Tense there. The crowd also reportedly yelled liar after she said she wasn't sure the president made the racist slur. This all coming as Republican Senator Jeff Flake says it's time Republicans start standing up to the president. Out front, David Gergen, former presidential advisor to 4 presidents, Perry Bacon Jr., senior political reporter for 538, and Mark Preston, CNN, senior political analyst. David Gergen, I want to start with you. Jeff Flake says it's time that Republicans start standing up to the president. They're not in the Senate largely. The question is, why?
Well, some have, and I think we ought to draw attention to that. Lindsey Graham, obviously we've seen from the show, Mitt Romney, Chuck Hagel, the former Republican senator from Nebraska, former defense secretary, said it was embarrassing for the country. So there are some who are beginning to stand up, and more power to them. Why don't others do that? Well, John, Politicians today on both sides of the aisle, I might underscore, think it's much more important to save their seats than to save their souls. And you find that Republicans are looking at those polls and they see that 60% of Republicans do approve of the way the country is moving. They like Trump. That's a pretty, they don't want to run up against that. If they break with the president, as Flake did, he paid a huge price for that. They really don't want to pay that price. But I would tell you this. I think a number of them are growing increasingly uncomfortable. It's the same kind of discomfort that you see in the White House staff as reported by the Wolf Book. And people are publicly defending the president, but increasingly are disturbed underneath it.
It's interesting, Perry, because David brought up Mitt Romney, who is not yet in the Senate, but, maybe soon. He came out against what the president said today. Let me read you what Mitt Romney wrote. The poverty of an aspiring immigrant's nation of origin is as irrelevant as their race. The sentiment attributed to the president is inconsistent with America's history and antithetical to American values. May our memory of Dr. King buoy our hope for unity, greatness, and charity for all. Now, this is interesting for several reasons. One, he's a senior Republican, an elder statesman of the party. But number two, he's Mitt Romney, who's considering a run for Senate in Utah right now, seems to be leaning toward running for Senate in Utah right now. What role do you think Mitt Romney will play going forward if he becomes a U.S. Senator?
I think Romney, there was reporting that President Trump wanted Orrin Hatch to run for re-election, and Orrin Hatch did not. And I think that's because Orrin Hatch has been a pretty strong supporter of the president. And I think if Mitt Romney gets there, he'll join and perhaps even lead the anti-Trump caucus among the Republicans. Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, probably going to be gone next year. But if Romney's there, that'll be one consistent critic. And a big factor here is Donald Trump lost the Utah primary in 2016, did pretty poorly in the general election, even though he won. So if you're a Utah Republican like Romney, who's got a big brand of your own, you can afford to irritate Trump without worrying about the base that much.
He doesn't have to worry about the base at all. To an extent.
Right.
Because, Donald Trump won, I think, just 51% of people in Utah voted against Donald Trump, right, between Evan McMullin and Hillary Clinton. And that's not good for a Republican running in that state. Mark Preston, to you, I was also struck by the timing of what Governor Romney did today, because people were wondering when he announces, which may come soon, for all we know, would he state where he stands in relation to the president? This seems to be that statement.
It seems to be that statement, but let's take a pause, though, and see what we heard from Mitt Romney in the past. Remember, he gave that speech back in, I guess it was 2016, where he was so critical of President Trump, not only for his politics and policy, but for his personality, for his persona, only to then go out and have dinner with him during the transition after Donald Trump had become elected president, and Mitt Romney was entertaining the idea of trying to become the Secretary of State. So I do agree with Perry that we could see Mitt Romney, assuming he runs, come to Washington and become the face of the anti-Trump movement. And dare I say that he would be asked to run for president as a freshman senator.
You're just saying that because you're a political reporter and you would like to see the story. David Gergen, Ben Carson, who was at an event, a Martin Luther King event today, Ben Carson, who's secretary, HUD secretary inside the administration, he did point out that at times he disagrees with the president. Listen to this.
I'm a member of this administration, and I don't agree with the president about everything that he said. Or of how it's said.
That's actually pretty striking to hear from a member of the administration, David. He's saying that now. The question is, does anyone say it to the president behind closed doors?
Well, not very often in most presidencies. I think Rex Tillerson has made it clear that there are times when he disagrees with the president, and he's been willing to take it. But I want to, coming back to Mitt Romney, there must be, Mark can talk about this, there must be a part of him that feels like he was humiliated when the president dangled the Secretary of State job, made him come running, and then took it away from him. It seemed pre-planned as a way to get some revenge against Romney for his earlier statements in the campaign. And so he comes with that baggage, and I think he will be an independent voice. I think he's one of the people, John, once you run and represent your party as a nominee of the party for the presidency, you also gain a loyalty to the party as such. And I think that Romney is more interested in saving the party than he is in saving Trump.
Perry, at 538, you watch the elections very carefully. Any sign that Republicans are scared of what this will do to their electoral prospects? We saw Congresswoman McMorris Rogers get booed there at that town meeting. Senator Grassley had a similar situation.
Yes, I think you see a lot of signs that you saw in the last few days. You've seen Mia Love running in Utah. She's a moderate House district. You saw Barbara Comstock. You didn't see a lot of members criticize Trump these last few days, but the ones who have are often in very vulnerable political situations. They're in House races or in Senate districts where they might, Senate states where they might ultimately lose. So I do think you see that. At the same time, as David was alluding to, Trump has an 80% approval rating among Republicans overall. Mm-hmm. He has the Fox News support. He has Mitch McConnell support. He has Paul Ryan support. He has most of the activist support. So it's really hard as a Republican, even if you're in a close race, to criticize the president openly. It's not going to help you politically. That's why Jeff Flake is leaving Congress and is free to give these speeches, because he's not running for re-election, because he knows that the base is with Trump right now. Mark Preston, last quick question to you. Next November, if, GDP is at 4% or 3.5% and the stock market's at 35,000, will anyone be talking about S-holes or S-houses?
Yes, absolutely, because Democrats are going to ensure that that's the case, and they're going to do it to try to rally up the Democratic base, Latinos, African Americans. They're going to try to get everyone to the polls. So that is, I shudder to say this now, John, but if you have children, cover their ears when they're watching TV, because there's going to be a lot of that in the next few months. All right, guys. Mark, David, Perry, great to have you here tonight. Thank you very much. Thanks, John. Out front next, three White House insiders set to answer, three Trump insiders set to answer questions on the Russia investigation, and that false alarm in Hawaii exposes a potentially serious problem with safety. Are any of us truly ready if a real missile heads this way?
The Situation Room is the command center for politics and breaking news. Join me, Wolf Blitzer, for extraordinary reports from around the world.
The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, weekdays at 5 Eastern on CNN.
Busy week ahead in the Russia investigation. White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, we just learned, will testify to the House Intelligence Committee as soon as this week. That is in addition to former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, who testifies tomorrow, and former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, who will talk later this week. These will be the first appearances to the committee since Michael Wolff's incendiary book, Fire and Fury. So what might come out of it? Evan Perez is out front tonight. Evan, what do we expect from these interviews, and will the book play a role?
Well, absolutely, John. All three of these witnesses are seen as having key knowledge about possible contacts between Trump campaign associates and people suspected of being Russian operatives. Of course, Hope Hicks is the big one. She's one of the president's closest aides. She's been with Donald Trump since the beginning of the campaign. And we know that she played a role in helping the president craft a misleading statement that was issued in the name of Donald Trump Jr. when the public first learned about that now infamous June 2016 Trump Tower meeting. The president's son, of course, had organized the meeting after Russians promised to provide damaging information on Hillary Clinton. Steve Bannon, on the other hand, he reportedly made those comments in that newly published Michael Wolff book, calling the Trump Tower meeting treasonous. So you can bet that he'll be asked about those comments. And of course, Corey Lewandowski, he ran the campaign for a time, and he'll have to answer questions about his interactions with George Papadopoulos, a former campaign advisor who, of course, has now pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, John.
So, Evan, on a completely different front, former Trump campaign officials Paul Manafort and Rick Gates were already charged with 12 counts of money laundering and lying on federal records. They'll be in court tomorrow morning. What is going on with this hearing, and when might their formal trial actually begin?
Right. Well, there's a lot apparently on tap for this hearing tomorrow, but we expect that it's going to focus on the possible trial date. Right now, that's being contemplated for May, but we expect that there could be a delay in that schedule. Lawyers for Rick Gates, one of those charged, is still trying to get the judge to relax bail terms. It's rather unusual 2 months after these charges were brought that these issues are still being worked out. But that's what I'll be in court tomorrow to see what else comes up in the hearing, John.
All right, Evan Perez, it's going to be a busy week. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon.
I'm sure.
Out front now, former White House ethics lawyer Richard Painter. Richard, this parade of Trump campaign insiders and White House insiders going before the House Intelligence Committee, Steve Bannon, Corey Lewandowski, Hope Hicks. What do you think the most valuable thing is that the committee might be able to learn from them?
Well, we'll see what their testimony reveals. But the scope of the committee's investigation is considerably broader than that of the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller. Mueller's job is to focus on crimes that were committed. We know the Russians committed some crimes here, and 4 Americans have been indicted, 2 pleading guilty to various crimes in connection with this investigation. But his investigation focuses on crimes. Congress is responsible for finding out about conduct that was criminal as well as conduct that was not criminal, to find out how Russia influenced this election, who in the United States was collaborating with the Russians, whether or not that collaboration was a criminal offense. The Congress is responsible ultimately for trying to figure out how to protect us from this ever happening again. So there's going to be a broad inquiry by Congress, and these senior White House officials and former campaign officials who are going to be called to testify. In the case of Steve Bannon, both a former campaign official and a former senior White House official, their revelations are going to be very important for Congress doing its job in finding out what happened in connection with the Russian interference with the election, obstruction of justice in the White House, various other things that may or may not be also investigated by Robert Mueller.
And then Hope Hicks, this is very interesting. Hope Hicks, isn't a former White House official. She's the current White House communications director. It's not often you see, a White House administration official like this going up to testify in front of an investigation like this. And she also already testified to the special counsel, Robert Mueller. Does that present any complications, or what should we be looking for there?
Well, her testimony in front of Congress had better be the truth. That's true for all of these people. Those who've testified and given statements to Robert Mueller, of course, are obligated to tell him the truth as well. So if there's inconsistency between the testimony that's given to Robert Mueller by anybody, whether they're current White House official or anyone else, and what's said in front of Congress, that's going to be a serious problem.
There had been some talk,
inconsistencies.
There had been some talk that the House Intelligence Committee was getting politicized, and essentially almost shut down. The fact that these 3 senior officials are going before that committee this week, does that make you think that maybe the committee has worked some of those problems out?
Well, that helps, that they're actually taking some testimony. Congress has shown repeatedly over the past several years that investigations are highly political. Mm-hmm. They spend hours and hours, days and days and days on the Hillary Clinton email thing. And that was driven by the Republicans, and now there seems to be very little desire on the part of the Republicans to investigate the Russia business. But I think people are getting the point that voters expect a thorough investigation.
Richard Painter, great to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Out front next, the false alarm heard around the world. We'll tell you what officials in Hawaii are doing tonight to guarantee that it never happens again. And
we're going to have a very, very big and powerful wall.
That's what the president has been selling. Is the president, though, the only one buying it? A lot of finger-pointing tonight over the false alarm Saturday morning that sent Hawaii into a panic for 38 agonizing minutes as residents there believed they were under imminent attack. The wrong button being pushed triggered alerts to go out via text message, radio, and TV, reading, "This is not a drill." Tom Foreman is out front. Tom, the person responsible for this mistake has been reassigned, but a whole lot of questions remain. What can you tell us about how this happened?
Well, John, with all of this talk about the North Korean missile and nuclear program, you can understand the tremendous concern when people suddenly were confronted with this message that said very explicitly, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. So how did this happen through an official government channel? Well, you have to think about what happens with launches like this. Every time a missile launches from North Korea, the infrared signal is picked up by U.S. ships and by satellites and other assets, and they're tracked by the military. They want to know how fast it's traveling, how high it is, where it might be going. if military commanders think it is headed toward something like Hawaii or some other U.S. asset, they'll try to shoot it down for one, but they also alert the state to start its emergency notification system. In Hawaii, this is how that would work. They would have a signal that would go out to sirens on the ground that would start sounding off, and also to radio and TV and to cell phones, sending a warning message to people out there. And the real goal here, bear in mind, you're about 4,600 miles from Pyongyang. Flight time for a missile would be somewhere around 20 minutes. They're trying to get as many of those minutes, 15, 16 or so, for people to run to some sort of relative safety. So by the time the missile would hit, they would have a chance of reducing the casualties, John.
So what went so wrong that sent so many people scrambling, and why did it take so long for it to get corrected?
Well, here's what went wrong in the first place. Officials in Hawaii say basically the person who was conducting a test that day, and they've been doing periodic tests of the systems, loaded in an actual alert message, not a test message. And then when the computer asked him, do you really want to send this message? He inadvertently pressed yes, and it went firing out there to the radio and TV and to cell phones out there. Now, very quickly, they started sending out messages saying it's not true, but they couldn't get it to the official channel here officially for 38 minutes. And because every state has its own system, yeah, there are concerns that something like this could happen somewhere else.
38 minutes. Tom Foreman, thanks so much. Out front next, Jeannie Mose on the president's big wall that seems to be growing a lot smaller. Is the president's promise of a great wall just a metaphor? Here's Jeannie Mose.
So far, it's been a wall of words.
I will build a great, great wall. We're going to have a very, very big and powerful wall. An impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful. It's going to be a Trump wall. And nobody builds walls better than me, believe me.
But it's also a shrinking wall. The 8 prototypes are as tall as expected. But after promising at least a 1,000-mile wall, the Trump administration has proposed a new structure running about 316 miles, with another 407 miles of replacement and secondary wall.
Yeah, there could be some fencing.
Fencing? Trump fence doesn't have the same ring.
They ever put my name on? I want a gorgeous wall. You know? The Trump wall, oh, will that be a beautiful wall?
Already, comedians are mocking the prototypes.
The Venetian. See-through means that immigrants can see a better life, but they can't touch it. Just look at the decorative fringe of bespoke razor spikes.
Talk about looking sharp.
One man even wore a spandex wall costume.
At a possible $18 billion, the cost of the wall isn't shrinking.
Who's going to pay for the wall?
Nope. Mexico says no way. And remember how every time a Mexican leader dissed the wall, it grew.
I'm not going to pay for that wall.
The wall just got 10 feet higher. It's true.
False. The prototypes are still 30 feet.
What are the walls going to be made out of?
Concrete, steel, and hype? A YouTuber created this mashup.
The wall just got 10 feet higher.
I'm building a wall, okay? I'm building a wall. I'm building a wall.
We're going to have the wall.
But even it won't keep out the proverbial fly on the wall. Jeannie Mose, CNN, New York.
All right, thanks for watching. AC 360 starts now.